You're very welcome back. We're reviewing the Sunday papers. We have Kieran Cunningham, chief sports writer with the Irish Daily Star, on the line. We also have Maire Treasa and Cheallaigh, who should be patrolling the GAA sidelines for us over the coming months. Instead, she is not, and she is in the midst of her medical studies. Kieran, Maire Treasa, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
No problem.
I'll start with the front pages of the sporting headlines. Sunday Independent first here. And lots of pictures from the Bundesliga yesterday, as you might imagine. Game on, football is back as Germany points the way forward. Beneath that, the main piece on the front page of the Sunday Independent is Colm O'Rourke, time for sanity to prevail in period of chaos. We might come to that piece later on, but he's talking about eventually, and in his eyes sooner rather than later, hopefully, the return to GAA action. Back page of the Mail on Sunday. Again, similar theme, Bundesliga. It's a picture of Haaland after scoring his goal yesterday. It's back. Germans prove football can return, but Premier League hit by more delay. They've certainly proved it can return. Can it stay returned is the point. And then also on the back page of the Mail on Sunday, no scrum if rugby is to make safe return. This is a significant intervention from a well-respected figure. Dr. Barry O'Driscoll, he has been an advisor and a doctor with World Rugby, an Irish rugby team doctor in the past. He is saying that rugby in particular is going to have to look at how the actual game functions. He says soccer, for instance, and we've seen this, soccer can more or less resume on the same circumstances on the field, but it's a nonsense to suggest it's the same for rugby. It's hard to say where rugby starts. I can't think of a team sport with the same dangers. Unlike soccer, the ball is handled frequently, and that's a point that I'm sure the GAA will have noted, but unlike soccer, the ball is handled frequently. There's a much bigger capacity there for germs to spread around. They would have to consider unopposed scrums, going through the motion without even putting your head down. Perhaps you'd have to stop rucks and mauls much quicker. If they get it wrong, it will do huge damage to rugby and cost millions of pounds, says Dr. Barry O'Driscoll in the Mail on Sunday there. The Sun back page, I mean, this is just not what they would have wanted. This is a picture of Hertha Berlin player Dedrick Boyata kissing his teammate in celebration. So social distancing rules have been parked for a moment here in the throes of celebration. So planting a kiss, two sweaty hands wrapped around the head of his teammate. A smacker in the face. Prem warns stars not to copy Boyata kiss. So that's a good starting point. Also at the end, Graham Geraghty says the GAA should call a halt to the 2020 season. Back of the Sunday World, a Bund deal, as in the Bundesliga. Professional football is back, but not as we know it. And they have a picture of an empty Borussia Dortmund stadium there, which is very strange, as the players did the traditional celebration with the fans. Obviously, the fans weren't there, but the players did it anyway. And then player power. Chelsea boss Frank Lampard warns that Prem stars could refuse to go training. And that is a theme, actually, which is developed elsewhere, i.e., on the Sunday Mirror back page, it's a picture of Willian. And he says, we don't think it's safe to return yet. Willian joins a growing list of fearful stars over the risks of COVID-19. Troy Deeney is another player in the papers who is talking of similar concerns. And the Star go with a similar line. They have a picture of Bundesliga action up top. It's a wonderful return over in Germany, but, they say, and then a picture again of Willian. The headline is, terrified and in the dark, majority not ready to come back, says Willian. So they are the back pages of the sports pages this morning. We have much to discuss, lots of really good pieces in the papers today. Kieran, we should start with a story that you've been covering, and in fairness to you, you have been covering this for a long time, but it's particularly blown up in the last couple of days. Really, I suspect, on the back in the main of Bob Arum's interview, and the extent to which it's very clear now that Daniel Kinahan has risen to the upper echelons of global boxing. It would seem, according to an interview that Bob Arum conducted, and Bob Arum is a legendary figure in boxing. He's 88 years of age. He has been promoting fights since the days of Ali and beyond. And Joshua Fury is the biggest fight any of us will watch, certainly this century and into the coming years, and it's on the horizon. So Tyson Fury is promoted by Bob Arum. He's CEO of Top Rank. So he co-promotes Tyson Fury with Frank Warren. And MTK are Fury's management company. This was a company initially founded by Daniel Kinahan. So Bob Arum, Kieran, did an interview of late where He made it clear, and I don't know, maybe you were aware of this, the extent of this, I don't know, but he made it clear the extent to which Daniel Kinahan is a key broker in this fight happening. He said, Bob Arum, we have great confidence in Dan. He is, in effect, our advisor regarding the Middle East. He's living there, has very, very good connections. So we early on ceded to Dan the authority to explore opportunities in the Mid East on behalf of Top Rank. He talks as well then about talking to Frank Warren. We told Frank our preference was this, and Frank agreed to go along. Said as well they've been talking to Eddie Hearn. So Eddie Hearn is the Joshua camp, saying, this is Bob Arum talking, saying, let's not go crazy with everybody talking to different people in the Middle East. Let Dan field all those proposals and report back to us. And when the fight happens next year, we'll be looking for a site. And that is what Dan is looking into, because everyone trusts Dan with handling that situation, whether it's Eddie, Frank or myself. Dan is like the captain when it comes to the practicalities of doing a fight in the Middle East. He is one of my favourite guys. No nonsense. His word is his bond. This is what Bob Arum said in a YouTube interview in the last 10 days or so. And that Daniel Kinahan is operating at this level jumped out to me as a surprise. I hadn't realised that he was one of the key brokers in what will be the biggest fight of the 21st century.
Well, in financial terms, it looks like it. There's talk of a purse up to $500 million just for the two fighters, so which is extraordinary sums, and it's because of particularly because of Tyson Fury. Like I know Anthony Joshua's fight with Klitschko at Wembley. I think it sold out Wembley in 10 minutes, and there was 150,000 on a waiting list within an hour. So he's a big draw, but Tyson Fury is the first heavyweight to make a big impact in America, probably since Mike Tyson, to make the kind of waves. His personality and what some people see as his charisma, they've bought into it big time. And Daniel Kinahan is a key broker in this. And I have to be honest, Joe, I'm astonished there's not more in the papers today on this story. To me, it's the big Irish sports story. It's bigger than John Delaney, because John Delaney was a big Irish story, but this is a big global sports story with an Irishman, a very controversial Irishman, Daniel Kinahan, at the centre of it. There isn't a word of it in the Mail on Sunday. There isn't a word in the Sunday Independent. Michael Foley has a piece in the Sunday Times Sport, and there's a piece in News. And Nicola Tallant in the Sunday World, who's done a lot on this story, who's a crime correspondent, has 4 pages on it. I think Stephen Breen in The Sun has another piece. Stephen Breen has written a book about the Kinahan cartel, which is well worth reading. But generally, I think this story has exposed a failure of the sports media. Like, we sometimes get defensive about being dismissed as the toy department. But the running on this story over a number of years, not just the last week or so, has been done by crime correspondents. And a lot of us in sport haven't wanted to know or been very late to the story. And given boxing's profile in Ireland, that's very strange. Like, boxing is Ireland's international sport. Over half the Olympic medals Ireland have won a bit come in boxing. Of world and European titles at professional level in any sport, most have come in boxing. Boxing at professional level in the States was built by Irish and Italian fighters. Like, there's a huge history there. Mm-hmm. So the fact that largely we're not getting into this story, a lot of people are uncomfortable with this story. A lot of people there's a fear factor. Like, Michael Foley quotes Billy Walsh, and it was an interview I did with Billy in July 2018. And I asked Billy about Daniel Kinahan and the kind of people who what he made of his involvement in boxing. And Michael quotes him in the piece. He said, this is what Billy said to me. Boxing gives people an outlet. It gives them a sport that teaches them respect and discipline. I'm worried about it because of some of the people that have got involved in the promotion of professional boxing in Ireland with connections to certain organisations. The people at the top that organise boxing need to have a look at themselves. What are their values? What are their core beliefs? It should be all about developing kids and leading them on a good pathway, whether it's to become a champion or a decent person. Sometimes when there's money involved, and there's huge money involved in pro boxing, people forget about values and what boxing does and what it's meant to do. And this is, after that interview, like Billy is, Joe, you know Billy. Billy is probably the most respected figure definitely in Irish boxing and one of the most in Irish sports. People have huge time for him. He's a former World Coach of the Year. What he says has a clout. And we approached various other prominent people in Irish boxing. None of them would talk on the record. A few told me off the record they agree with Billy, but they're afraid to speak out. I think it's the same with some in the media, that they're uncomfortable with this because of the reputation of the Kinahan cartel. that they think, okay, we'll leave it to sports guys. But I really wonder if this had been highlighted more by the sports media in the last couple of years, would Daniel Kinahan have been able to get to the level he's at within the sport? If he'd been challenged, if MTK figures had been challenged more about where the money came from to build MTK at press conferences, if fighters had been asked about it, would it have happened? Like, we'll come to Paul Kimmage piece later, and Paul talks about when he was spitting in the soup. Who in boxing is spitting in the soup? Who in the boxing media is spitting in the soup and challenging these people and getting into this story? I don't see it.
In the limited time, so there's a huge amount of coverage today across the papers. I did go back just to see to what extent it was discussed with the likes of Frank Warren. In 2018, he was asked about the situation. And I should state very clearly, Daniel Kinahan has absolutely no criminal convictions whatsoever. Make that point. But Frank Warren was asked about the controversy surrounding Daniel Kinahan's involvement in the sport. Frank Warren promotes Tyson Fury, and he called Daniel Kinahan an honourable man. My office deals with MTK, as does every boxing promoter in the world. I have no knowledge of his business dealings. That was in 2018. So there were questions asked. They are dealt with. Bob Arum similarly was asked questions in the YouTube interview. Dealt with them, move on, stay in my lane was his attitude. I'm not really sure who, you mentioned the top of boxing. I don't know who effectively runs boxing or who decides, who manages, who promotes. That just seems to be open season in effect. There is coverage. You mentioned Mick Foley's piece, so to stay on that for a second, the point Michael Foley is making in his piece in the Sunday Times, boxing kingmaker needs clean slate. So in effect, people are very familiar with what happened at the Regency a number of years ago, and that made fighting in Ireland impossible, effectively. The Gardaí do not want fights happening here for those reasons, and the legacy of that is still with us, and we have seen what's happened between the Kinahans and the Hutches and the fatalities in that gang war. So, post that, as I understand it, Kieran, Daniel Kinahan sold, or it was Matthew Macklin, according to Sandra Vaughan, who now runs MTK, sold MTK to Sandra Vaughan, which she now runs, and she is absolutely clear that Daniel Kinahan has no involvement in MTK. She says he's an advisor in some capacity to the fighters, and they're perfectly entitled to be advised by whoever they want. But so post-Regency, his involvement with MTK effectively stopped in that it was sold to Sandra Vaughan, and it seemed like he had, to some extent or other, taken a step back. He's living now in the Middle East. The point of Michael Foley's piece, Boxing Kingmaker Needs a Clean Slate, is that there is a level of reinvention going on here.
Yeah.
So why this has ballooned up, I suppose, is that Bob Arum, who is boxing royalty, has given this interview and been absolutely effusive in his praise of Daniel Kinahan and his character and the role he plays in boxing. Sandra Vaughan has done an interview in the last couple of days, and she talked about the outrageous behaviour amongst the Irish media. So I know you're having a pop at the media, but actually if you listen to Sandra Vaughan, she gives the distinct impression that the Irish media have been on this story.
Yeah, but that's crime correspondence.
Okay, fine, okay, but media is media, for all we know, a sports department and a crime correspondent decided that the crime correspondent was better suited to handle a story. But I take your point, but equally, it's been covered. It has been covered. So Sandra Vaughan has said that the Irish media are a law unto themselves, that she stopped reading it. It's a daily joke in there. What have they written today? But she has said that she takes advice from Daniel Kinahan, and she said, it jumped out at me when she said, anyone in boxing who says they're not collaborating with Daniel Kinahan and working with him is lying. That is the extent of his effect in the sport. And that's the point that Michael Foley raises here, that between Bob Arum and this most recent interview where Sandra Vaughan says, yes, of course, I talk to Daniel Kinahan, everyone does in boxing, that his role in the sport is being promoted by others in the sport in a way that it mightn't have been a year ago.
Yeah, but
is that why this has blown up?
Yeah, there's a couple of things in this, Joe, that are very important. Daniel Kinahan is very, very good at what he does in boxing. He knows boxing. He has a genuine passion for boxing. The fighters and coaches he works with have a lot of time for him. They're looked after. They're looked after better than other management companies. This is, when he was involved in MTK, and even as an advisor now, he's very good at making these deals. No, we can't get away from that. He's a huge passion for sport. And what has happened for the sport, what has happened in the last 3 months, is not just about the Bob Arum interview. Mm-hmm. There's been a concerted effort in the last 3 months or so to rebuild Daniel Kinahan. I don't know if rebuild is the right word, but to build Daniel Kinahan up as a legitimate businessman who is very good for boxing and who's going to be key power broker in boxing. And this has been coming from all angles. There's been a huge amount of stuff on social media from boxers within MTK or people with connections to MTK. There was a bizarre rap video released on YouTube by a guy called Jay Stride, called Major Plans, which went into a conspiracy theory around the Regency shooting. And this conspiracy theory has been pushed by various people with connections to MTK. It's effectively saying that it was a combination of the Gardaí, the Fine Gael, and the media who tried to kill Daniel Kinahan at the Regency, and they ended up killing somebody else by mistake. And there's actually a documentary now being pushed on YouTube this evening that pushes the same thing, and they've got footage of a Garda shooting a guy in the ground. Like, this is the kind of madness you're dealing with here. But this has been planned, and it looks clear to me has been orchestrated over the last few months, and it's a PR war now. And it's, I think it's a challenge for the media. Like, you were defensive of the sports media there, Joe, and I wouldn't let them off the hook because of this. There's nothing happening. There's been nothing happening for 9 weeks. If you look at the papers a lot of days, people are really struggling for ideas a lot of days. This is a huge story, and a lot of the media have ignored it. Keith Duggan covered it in Irish Times yesterday. I was really glad Keith did, because not enough journalists are getting into the meat of this story and why it matters.
Okay. Or Treasa, do you want to come in on any pieces which caught you or jumped out at you?
What on that story in itself, I suppose the big thing on a macro picture that stood out to me was that, one thing that everybody says about Daniel Kinahan is that he is a good promoter, he is a good advisor, he delivers on what he promises. And very, very simply, we all know, we've heard of so many cases of boxers in Ireland, all over the world, who have been let down by promoters, who've been left financially out of pocket, mental health difficulties, housing difficulties, life difficulties because of being let down. This doesn't seem to be happening here. And I think this is a bigger question for boxing, in that why is this still consistently happening, that too many boxers are an afterthought? Everything else is planned aside from the well-being of the boxer in the ring who's taken the punches for God knows how many rounds, for how many years and how many fights. And I just feel that this is another issue. It's as important as what Kieran was talking about, but it's another issue separately, I think. I think that too often in the world of boxing, the boxers are the last thought, if that makes sense. And it's worrying that even at the top echelon, that's still going on.
Mm.
Yeah. But Joe, can I make one point here? The boxers come from a certain community. They come from often deprived areas, come from working class areas, come from areas with a lot of drugs and crime.
Yeah.
And they come from the same communities that have been ravaged by the drug trade in Ireland and been ravaged by things that the Kinahan cartel have done. So I can't let boxers off the hook on this. Like, everybody has a choice in life to make. I know sometimes you're not getting many offers, and you think, God, I have to look after my family, and I'll just go along with this. But there's people within Irish boxing like Eric Dunham and Jason Quigley who haven't gone down that route. Who just say, I don't want to get involved with these kind of people. So I think it's also brought up too often that boxing has a shady past, and there was links to organised crime in the past. That's irrelevant. Like, a lot of that was 50, 60 years ago. I think you have to look at the here now, and this is the biggest story in Irish sport, and it's going to get bigger because this fight is going to happen. And we didn't really get into the fact that he was announced last week as an advisor to KHK, which is owned by the Bahraini royal family, which have massive money behind them. Mm. And Daniel Kinahan has now been employed as an advisor for them. So he is a global power broker now. He's now the most powerful Irish person in global sport.
Mm. The front page of The Sun today, by the way, leads with the story that Daniel Kinahan has hired a top UK law firm to act for him as he insists he is simply an Irish businessman. He maintains he has done nothing wrong. Sandra Vaughan, in her interview on YouTube, she is CEO of MTK, she was talking about the Irish media at large. They're going to have to at some point acknowledge the fact that, as I say, whether they like it or not, people like Bob Arum, the Prince of Bahrain, Frank Warren, Eddie Hearn, all of these big fights will happen because of Daniel Kinahan. That is fact. The other part is fiction. I don't know whether it's the Irish mentality, but at some point, would you not be proud that someone from inner city Dublin is actually sitting at the table with that level of organisation, with the Prince of Bahrain or Bob Arum, making history, making fights? For Ireland, would you not be proud of that? Would you not be proud that someone has got out of that inner city life and made a huge success? Yeah. So that is the line that has been pushed.
Sandra Vaughan wants cheerleading in boxing media, and she gets a lot of that within the boxing media. That's what she wants. She doesn't want any questions asked. That video interview, they sent out a transcription of that as a press release. At the end, it said, no further comment from MTK. So you can't actually ask them questions. That interview was with an in-house video channel. So, like, that thing we should be proud of because from the inner city. Daniel Kinahan has no criminal convictions. His father has convictions for drugs and money laundering in 3 different countries. So he comes from a family who made their money from drugs. So we can't say money from crime. So we can't say it's a rags to riches story. He came from a wealthy family whose money came from crime.
Okay. There is coverage in the Sunday World, in the Sunday Times, page 7, and Mick Foley's piece. It's in the Sun as well, front page and beyond. And it's extensive today. And I would say, Kieran, I've never seen coverage of Daniel Kinahan's involvement in boxing like I have this weekend. This is a new precipice. It's come after, on various fronts, his involvement has been celebrated, has been talked up. Bob Arum, Sandra Vaughan, others, you mentioned the rap song. So he has been pushed forward in a sense, taken some of the spotlight for the first time. And I would say this is the first reaction back. That is almost where the story is.
I think it's important to remind people as well, Joe, that the people might forget this or they mightn't have noticed the time. But MTK banned Republic of Ireland media. Yeah. They're still allowed Northern Ireland media because of coverage of Daniel Kinahan's links to the group and Daniel Kinahan and claims that were made about Daniel Kinahan. So that raised questions then about the media. That was 2017,
Kieran, was it?
No, 2018 the ban came in.
Okay.
Yeah, 2018 the ban came in place. The management buyout when Sandra Vaughan took over was 2017. But Northern Ireland journalists and UK journalists and US journalists still went to MTK events, etc., and press conferences and never asked questions about this ban. I think that was, it is an indictment of the media, this whole story. It's a story about the media as much as boxing, as much as crime, I think.
They represent the likes of Carl Frampton, Michael Conlon. Tyson Fury obviously is a huge asset of theirs. On their website they say about 100 fighters plus. How big has MTK Global become, Kieran, in the fighting game?
Well, it was becoming a major player, but getting Tyson Fury on board over the last couple of years has pushed it up now to the highest level. Like when you were, in that interview, they're dealing now MTK with Bob Arum, with Frank Warren, with Eddie Warren, with ESPN, with Sky. They're tied in like this. They're major players now.
Major players.
There's no getting away from them. Major players.
Okay. We'll take a short break. Back with more in the papers in a few months.
Newstalk.com/extra. It's what you've been missing.
Competitions, quizzes, TV voting and other premium rate texts can be pricey, but stopping them is easy when you remember the word STOP and how to spell it. S. Stop premium rate services by T. Texting the word STOP in response, or O. Opt out through your mobile network to bar these costly texts for good, giving you P. Peace of mind and a pared down phone bill. For more information, visit comreg.ie. Comreg, independent information you can trust.
Now, more than ever, we need to protect our environment and manage our waste responsibly. Household waste services are operating normally. Please use an authorised waste collector or your local civic amenity. Illegal dumping destroys our communities and results in fines or prosecution. For more information on managing your waste, go to mywaste.ie. Supported by the local authorities and regional waste management offices. Brought to you by the Government of Ireland.
You could start your own niche podcast. Hi, welcome to Yoga with Yogurts. Or you skip that and quickly go to Choosy from the Irish Independent. Choosy.ie is a new price comparison site where you could find a better deal for your gas and electricity, saving you more than €400 a year. Doesn't that sound healthy? Choosy, you have nothing to losey. Visit choosy.ie. Research by the Commission for the Regulation of Utilities showed the average Irish household that switched their dual fuel tariffs every year saved €1,696 over 4 years. Terms and conditions apply.
Paracity stores will reopen from Monday 18th of May to facilitate the supply of essential home appliances. Please order online for collection in store or make use of our home delivery service. For more information, go online to paracity.ie.
This is an urgent appeal from Concern Worldwide. As COVID-19 severely disrupts food supplies and the UN warns of multiple famines, the world's poorest people are at risk of dying of hunger. Concern is on the ground providing emergency food to families, but we urgently need your help. Please visit concern.net today to give what you can. Thank you.
From music to rock out to, chill out to and dance to. From sweater weather to workout playlists. Whatever mood you're in, Go Loud has music to match. Download the Go Loud app now or add us on your smart speaker. Go Loud. Podcasts, radio and music to your ears. Go Loud!
Every day on News Talk, we talk to hundreds of thousands of people right across the country. We're doing it right now. But we don't just talk to them, we talk with them. We challenge, we entertain, we inform, we engage. News Talk listeners are in the know, and our advertisers are too. Want to be part of the conversation? Talk to us today and discover how advertising on News Talk could work for you. Email advertising@newstalk.com.
This week on the Home Show podcast. The mortgage moratorium has been extended for another 3 months, but what does this actually mean for individuals and how will it affect them? Mortgage expert Martina Hennessy is here with all the details. Knockmore House in Enniskerry has become the unofficial star of the TV hit series Normal People. It's the childhood home of Shane Ross, and he joins me to discuss his childhood experience there. And Roisin Murphy is here with all the details on the best fire pit for your outdoor space this summer.
The Home Show with Sinead Ryan on News Talk.
Listen to the podcast now at newstalk.com and on the News Talk app.
Hate missing out? News Talk Extra is news, entertainment and all the latest podcasts, plus expert tips and competitions straight to your inbox. Subscribe now at newstalk.com/extra.
From true crime believers to science and business achievers, sports, arts and comedy to the latest entertainment wannabe. Get political, get healthy, get educated. Get all your favourite podcasts on Go Loud. Download the Go Loud app now or add us on your smart speaker. Go Loud. Podcasts, radio and music to your ears.
Off the ball. This is News Talk.
Okay, welcome back. We're going to have news headlines in just a moment. We'll continue things with Kieran Cunningham and Maire and Cheallaigh looking through the Sunday papers. Come 3 o'clock, Packy Bonner is going to join us. He'll be with us between 3 and 4 o'clock this afternoon, talking about a fairly remarkable career, not just with Ireland and his 80 caps, but being signed by Jack Stein, going over to Celtic, playing 642 times for Celtic, 4 league titles, 3 Scottish Cups, League Cup wins as well. So remarkable career to chat to Packy Bonner about between 3 and 4 o'clock. At 4 then, Seamus Power will join us and tell us about life on the PGA Tour. Waterford man, he's 33 years old now, Seamus. He's been on the PGA Tour for 4 years. Not easy, but he's clung on thus far, and we'll chat to him about life over there as they begin to resume in June. And then Paul Warwick will join Neil Treacy between 5 and 6 for a conversation about his time in Ireland with Connacht and Munster, obviously. So that is all on the way. We'll take a break for news headlines and then we'll pick up with Kieran Cunningham and more Treasa and Cheallaigh and review the Sunday papers.
On 106 to 108 FM. On newstalk.com. On smart speaker. And on the News Talk app. This is News Talk.
It's 2 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Ben Finnegan. An investigation into the delayed reporting of COVID-19 cases at the Maire Hospital is expected to find it did meet its legal requirements. On Thursday, health authorities were made aware of an extra 244 cases at the Dublin facility. Hospitals are legally obligated to report infectious diseases as soon as they're aware of them. Health Minister Simon Harris has warned checks would be needed to see if the matter was criminal. Speaking at a HSE briefing today, Chief Executive Paul Reid said he had seen a draft report.
The information that was submitted to the labs at some stage, at a stage in the process, did not have the full details, and particularly all the names, etc., of those cases. Therefore, it didn't allow us for the complete correlation of the data at the appropriate time.
There's been a roughly 10% increase in attendances and admissions at emergency departments in the past week. However, they still remain well below what they were this time last year. Anne O'Connor from the HSE outlines there's been an increase in older people.
When we look at the over 75s attendances, they've gone up by 11.5%, which is very significant for us, and admissions of 9.4%. So even though they're still down on last year, now we're at a stage where the over 75s are less than 8% less than last year. So we are seeing a return to a level of activity that we would expect around this time of year.
The Green Party leader says the next week will be crucial in government formation talks. Officials from the party, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, are discussing forming a coalition. Eamon Ryan says they'll need to ramp up this week.
I mean, it's working, but there's a lot of work to do. It's not, nothing is decided. The next week will be critical because it really does ramp up.
And a ceremony has taken place in Dublin as part of the National Famine Commemoration. Around 1 million Irish people died and another 1 million emigrated between 1845 and 1849. The event at St Stephen's Green was closed to the public in line with public health advice. It's 2 minutes past 2.
News Talk Weather.
Thanks to the AA. Need to renew your AA car insurance? Go online to the aa.ie/myAA.
Cool and cloudy in the northwest with some showers, some sunny spells in other parts of the country. Highs of 13 to 18 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
OK, welcome back. We'll pick things up and review the Sunday papers. Damien Murphy tweeted me and Kieran to say, come off it, Joe. In fairness to Kieran, he's been the only sports journalist talking about this until this week. The rest of the sports media have fudged this story. End of. Happy to read out the tweet. I was talking about the media generally, but I do take the point on sports media. I do take that point, Kieran. If I gave you the impression I was saying a wonderful,
it's fine.
Thorough job has been done by the sports media, I was merely making the point, and it's more of a nuanced one, that I did go back and look and saw Frank Warren has been asked about this a number of years ago. And maybe within certain papers, crime journalists and sports media have said, well, you're a better place to take this on. That's not to say that sports media couldn't have done more. So just so I'm being very clear, I'm not saying that an outstanding job has been done. And we're talking about it now, that's for sure.
Yeah, but just a very short response to that. A lot of people, basically it's been crime correspondence within tabloids. And not everybody reads crime correspondence in tabloids. Not everybody reads tabloids. Some people who read tabloids might only read the sport. So for that reason, I think it should be covered in sport as well. Because I think a lot of people... I've been surprised how over the past week how many people weren't aware of this story. So
can I interject there as well, though, and say that I think we need to acknowledge as well that media as a whole has taken a massive hit financially in recent years, and we've seen the effect of that in particular since this coronavirus pandemic arrived. And I think sport again got in a really, really hit when it came to financials. And I've often found as well, between where I've worked in media now for over 10 years. A lot of the time when a good sports story came up that was found originally by sports journalists or happened on a sports journalist watch would be taken away from the toy department and then covered by real news. I'm thinking, for example, of when Hickey was arrested in Brazil during the Olympics, that kind of thing. Whenever there's anything that comes with governance or administration, that kind of stuff, perhaps it's a resources issue. Real news, for the want of a better phrase, while they're not turning out money at the moment either, tend to be better funded than the sport department, which rightly or wrongly is often viewed in lots of different organisations as the toy department, who wouldn't be capable and wouldn't even be given the resources, or might only have the one person covering everything over a weekend. I know it's not the case everywhere, but I think in the defence of sports journalists, a lot of the time they are swimming a solo run against the tide a lot of the time as well, in all sports, not just boxing.
Yeah, that's a fair point, Maire. But just one. It is interesting, though, just when talking to a few of the crime correspondents that work on this, they are generally baffled why there isn't more sport coverage by sports journalists as well. Like they're wondering why the boxing angles aren't being chased up, or why people aren't going after people within the boxing and within sport, even within the Boxing Union of Ireland. Like, why don't they talk? They're the governing body of the professional sport here. Why don't they take a stance on this? Why don't they advise boxers maybe it might be a good idea to go with get involved with the business that's been questioned so much?
Yeah. Okay. Well, MTK would say they provide an excellent service and they're not here to defend themselves, so I need to put that point on the record. But as to your wider point about the media, I take it. I think it's fair. Where will we go next? We're looking through the Sunday papers. We have Paul Kimmage has done a lengthy piece. We'll come to that in a few moments' time. There's lots on GAA and returning to play. Maire, we haven't heard too much from you. Let's get into the GAA coverage. Obviously, you should be on the sidelines at the moment. What piece do you want to start with? There's quite a few, naturally.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in staying quiet when I don't know much about things instead of shouting into the vacuum. I suppose one thing I'm probably a bit more familiar with would be GAA and rugby and all that kind of stuff. And this time of year, like you said, I should be on a sideline. And probably a bit more than most, I have a bit more maybe of an understanding over the health and safety aspects and public health, just because of what I've been doing for the last 2 years. I'm by no means an expert, but I understand it a lot more now after working in medical areas for the last 2 years now, and I would have 2 years ago. It's an extra basic knowledge. But I think a really interesting article maybe, because obviously this is the running theme throughout all the sports pages today, is how COVID-19 is affecting sport, and will we or will we not participate over the summer. And it's actually interesting, was it Thursday night? I think you had Adrian Barry on with you, Joe, and he was being accused of being curmudgeon because he was saying, I'm sick of this. Nobody knows what's happening. Let's stop speculating. And I think we are at that phase now, I think, where people are tired of the speculation and do want answers. And I think Colm O'Rourke has a really good piece here on the front page of the Sunday Independent, where he does a little bit of a parsing through the numbers and where people have been infected by COVID-19 and the rates in rural and urban areas and the cancellation of the Leaving Cert, and how talking about things are planning to come back together and saying the GAA is still completely locked down. And I agree with some of the points he makes. He's talking about how, maybe the GAA perhaps have been ever so slightly too conservative. But of course, if they weren't conservative and if somebody got sick, all hell would break loose. And then he's talking about the cancellation of the Leaving Cert, and how basically the conundrum of the Taoiseach spoke last week about opening schools as soon as possible. The pathway should be opened up for sports sooner. In the next round, there'll be permission for groups of 4 to kick around while maintaining social distancing. Again, the figures and the science seem to contradict this, and there's no reason why 4 or 14 or 24 young people should not be engaged in training, as they won't pass the virus to each other. And of course, when you make this argument, there's always the danger of being jumped on by the crowd who will say that you have no respect for frontline workers or those who have passed away or those in the vulnerable groups. My argument is nothing to do with these respected workers or the dead, but I've expressed the view before that asking people over 70 to stay indoors for the last 2 months was absolutely wrong. And this is where I begin to disagree with Colm. He says, what is happening, in fact, there's no critical media, no questioning. Fear has replaced rational discussion. And that's untrue. I think anybody who's watched these COVID-19 briefings nightly held by the likes of Simon Harris and Taoiseach, Dr. Tony Holohan, they are questioned. And actually from feedback I've seen from other journalists, there would be even more questioning, except they're not allowed, or they might be they're told you can have a certain amount of questions per press conference. So, and also it's a bit difficult to ask people to question something that they don't understand. The experts themselves don't seem to understand it. And you can't have a rational discussion on a background of fear. And I think we're coming to the stage now perhaps where people fear it a lot less than they used to, with the more understanding we do have. So Colm is kind of doing I don't want to use the phrase mental gymnastics. He's trying to parse it all and make sense of it like the way we all are. And he's making his own sense of it with, I think, perhaps not the right idea of how testing works, how journalists can question those who are enforcing the decisions works. Like he cites here, a farmer can get a test for a bullock or a horse back within 24 hours, but this crisis has seen people waiting a month. The latest is we can expect to get results back within a few days. The whole world is looking for these tests. They're hard to get, and there was an assay shortage. We couldn't find it. There were cases for, we've heard of how, stuff was on the way to Ireland, was intercepted by other countries and taken away. And the labs are full of people ready to do the tests. That we know, that the testing has been expanded. That we know. And then you could make the argument, even if testing is expanded, who's to say that, for example, because it is prime GAA championship season, why should GAA players maybe get precedence when it comes to testing? Who's to say that's right? Is it right? I don't know. We're coming into the philosophical question of what's right and wrong and how much risk is acceptable. But basically, this is my long-winded way of saying that Colm O'Rourke thinks people should get back to the GAA sooner rather than later. He says, hopefully, too, the GAA advisory group will give the green light to cool camps. And you can see why people be worried by that, and why not everybody would want to send their child to a cool camp. And you can see why nothing has been advised in that area yet, except the GAA's decision to keep the fields locked down. I suppose Colm was querying, and other people as well. Pat Spillane is in the Sunday Independent saying, do we really mistrust people so much they can't manage the local football field to allow for social distancing and people to have walks? And that's the big discussion that's going to happen now.
Yeah, Colin mentions it in his piece that John Horan had said that certain volunteers had been in touch to say that they didn't want to have the responsibility of almost policing those fields, and that was one of the reasons they had closed the GAA fields around the country. There's no doubt they'd be a great place for people to go and walk without having to step around traffic or step around each other on footpaths. Do you want to come in on the O'Rourke piece, Kieran, before we move on?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of pieces that kind of cover similar ground. There's to Colm's piece, like Pat Spillane in the Sunday World and Eamon Sweeney in the back of the Sunday Independent as well.
What's Pat Spillane saying?
It's kind of it's along the same thing. Like, are we being too strict? Is the GAA taking too strict a stance? Can we go back to the playing fields a bit sooner? Can we open up playing fields? And I'm a bit uneasy with a lot of it. There's a lot of people talking about this kind of stuff now, Joe, and I have no medical expertise, so I'm uneasy talking about it. Pat Spillane's an ex-teacher, Colm O'Rourke's a teacher. They have no medical expertise. And there's a lot of people, this is a global thing now. People look at it reopening and then having concerns about a second or third wave, how you manage this. So, like Eamon Sweeney's piece, he makes a lot of solid arguments. When you look at the Bundesliga starting up, Royal Ascot will take place. There's various sporting events that are going to happen. But the big difference with the GAA is it's amateur. Yeah. You can't cocoon players. Like, they're going to go back to their families and their workplaces. You can't put them in hotels or training camps. And
he does say on that, though, because that thought occurred to me when Eamon Sweeney, again, similar vein to Colm O'Rourke or Pat Spillane, was talking about Bundesliga, Serie A, La Liga, Premier League, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA Tour, Formula One. It did, as he was saying all that, jump out at me certainly, well, the GAA is amateur. Although later on he makes the point, and this is the point we will all have to arrive at increasingly across the next 2-3 years of our lives. Here's the thing, over the next couple of months, a lot of GAA players will go back to work. The pubs will reopen and a semblance of normality will return. In the circumstances, they may wonder why Gaelic games are the one part of everyday life which remains entirely off limits for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, well, we are going to have to find a way to manage it because... it does look likely a vaccine could be a good bit down the road. So we're going to have to find a way living with the reality that's here now. And sport will have to come back in some form, and GAA will have to come back in some form. But I think it's irritating people, Joe, to an extent that there's such special pleading on part of sport. Yeah. To many people, the summer's about the GAA Championship. To many other people, the summer's about live music and music festivals. That's all gone. To many people... losing EastEnders has been very hard, or Coronation Street going to 3 episodes a week rather than 6. Like, a lot of people are dealing with a lot of things in their life they've lost that they love. And,
and who's to say one thing is more important than the other? This is the thing. Yeah. But I think we need to accept that we may not get a vaccine. This is the drum I've been beating for the last 6 weeks. We may never get one. We may end up in a situation like HIV, where we don't have a vaccine, but we now have very good antiretroviral drugs that allows people who are HIV positive to live very full lives. And I was having this back and forth with somebody on Twitter during the week, and he said, well, unless there's a vaccine, I can't see how it's safe. You couldn't risk bringing that virus into your home. And I said, but do people still have sex without a vaccine? It's called finding a way to live parallel with the virus that has found a way to kill us. And then we have to accept as well that this virus is, I'm not even sure if it's evolving or if it's just affecting different populations in different ways. In the Asian countries, it seems to be very much more about respiratory. Here in this part of the world and in the US, it seems to be affecting the blood vessels in and around the heart and the lungs, which is very unusual when it comes to treating what looks like to be a respiratory disorder. We don't know what's happening with it. So we do have to accept that even the flu vaccine, it's difficult to get people to take that. And even the flu vaccine itself is based every year upon a guesstimate based on what scientists have seen happening in Australia and those countries, thinking, well, more than likely, these will be the strains that will arrive on our shores. And it's only, in that case, it's still only maybe 60% effective. So we don't have cures for these things. And we do have to, and this then, I'm very glad I'm not the person making this decision, because it's the philosophical question of how much risk do you take? Because we're at the stage now where the whole country has shut down to, first of all, it was preserve the HSE. The HSE, if we had allowed this virus run rampant through us, and I'd be forever grateful that we had people who ensured that didn't happen, the hospitals would have been overwhelmed. There would not have been enough space in the hospitals to cope with it. So that had to be done. The curve had to be flattened, and it was done really, really well by most people in Ireland, I think, to ensure that didn't happen. But we're at the stage now where there's a lot of people who possibly contracted and didn't even know it. There's a lot of people who shook it off after a few days. And it's thanks be to God, or whoever God you believe in, if you believe in one, it's only a very small minority that it affects terribly. And I'm not making little of that. I worked in ICU. I've seen the worst thing it can do to people. So I am not making any little of that. And I have huge respect, and I understand why some people do not want to put themselves in that possible potential of harm. But there's a lot of us that doesn't apply to. The big trouble is, I suppose, we just don't know if it affects you, how it is going to affect you. But that's where you weigh up the risk. Like, the day will come where you have to decide what's more dangerous for me, to go to a football game, to travel maybe from, say, Donegal down to Páirc Uí Chaoimh. What's more dangerous, that I stand in the crowd and maybe contract coronavirus, or I get hit by a car on the way down? And that's very black and white, but that's where we have to come to. I'm glad not the person making the decision, but somebody's going to have to make it at some point.
Kieran, a point I'd put to you on Eamon Sweeney's point, that he says, here's the thing, over the next couple of months, a lot of GAA players will go back to work, the pubs will reopen, semblance of normality returns. In the circumstances, they may wonder why Gaelic games are the one part of everyday life which remains entirely off limits. What jumps out at me there is a simple point. Pubs reopening, shops reopening, the economy reopening, they are all to do with people's livelihoods. I mean, people are out of work, they have no money. They are scared out of their minds for all those reasons. And so livelihoods and pubs reopening, how many thousands of people work in that industry and will suddenly be back at work? Pubs reopening absolutely trump sport coming back, especially in amateur sport. And I'm cognizant of people in Croke Park who've taken a hit, absolutely. But if we're talking about thousands in other sectors, then that trumps sport. Like, we may be looking at a second wave here. More people died in the second wave of the Spanish flu. Who knows what's around the corner? So sport does not trump the economy. It just doesn't.
No,
and I've no problem with League of Ireland coming back ahead of GAA if it's for players, it's their livelihoods. Yeah. So that is the simple reason why GAA is towards the back of the queue here.
Yeah, and it's why it would be very, very difficult for club games to come back. Like, a few weeks ago, people were saying, "No, this could be the year of the club," but it would be far simpler to have inter-county games because of the numbers involved and because of being able to cocoon them to a certain extent. The club, I don't know how you could go ahead with club fixtures, or it will be very difficult. We're going to have to find a way down the line. But the last time I did the paper review, Joe, I got a fair bit of stuff back about being too bleak and too pessimistic about where we are. But I genuinely think that this has changed sport beyond recognition, and that it will take a long, long time to ever go back to where we were. Like, that even if grounds open again, like Dennis Walsh has written about this, like, how many people will be allowed into Croke Park? It might be 10,000, if they're putting spacing in place. It might be 5,000. Like, the idea we'd have full stadia again before a vaccine, and as Maire says, we might never have a vaccine. It's just, it's really hard to get your head around, but I think that's where we are.
And also, like when you mentioned there, we might get a more deadly second wave. For all we know, this could be the second wave. We just don't know. We've all seen that example. There was 2 weeks ago where they found a sample in France dated back to the end of December. When they checked it with the appropriate assays, they found actually this man did have COVID-19. So perhaps this may have been around sooner. We don't know. There's too many unknowns. But what I do know is we have very good immunologists and virologists and epidemiologists and public health experts who have done their best, and what they can tell us is if you keep your 2 metre social distancing around you, the chances of catching it is fairly slim. Like, I'm open to correction here, but as far as I know, say for argument's sake, if I'm tested and I'm found to be positive for COVID-19, the contact tracers, the people they will be contacting will be people who live under the same roof as me, or somebody who was in my close contact for 15 minutes, at least 15 minutes. And it's proper close contact. It's the equivalent of me and you sharing a newspaper and having a read over it. It's not me in one end of an office and somebody else the other end. So we have to decide at some point, and I know you said as well about how GAA, it is amateur and therefore they are back at the queue, and that's very understandable, but I think it ties in well with pieces written in the Mail on Sunday about recreation and health and well-being and psychological well-being. We have to let people out. We have to find a way. We can only allow it if it's safe, or we can measure the risk or weigh up the ratio of risk to not risk. But we have to find ways. We can't just keep the gates locked. I think that's my feeling. That's growing with speaking McGowan. I think I'm beginning to agree with Kieran as well.
We spoke a couple of weeks ago with Shane Keegan, and I had a disagreement with him whereby I said, what's the problem with GAA teams or teams right around the country training in a socially distant way? So they get the sun on their backs, evening sun, camaraderie, mental health hopefully is improved. They get all their endorphins. Okay, they mightn't get a match, but they're back training and improving and playing the sport in a socially distant way. That would seem very possible in the short term.
You would imagine so. I mean, again, we're not the experts here, and if Tony Holland had to be listening to this, he could have his head in his hands.
I'm just making the point. It's certainly a better option than rushing back to play amateur matches.
Yes, absolutely. And you could argue, I was in the camp that I thought bringing back club first might be better. As time goes on now, I'm more swayed by thinking maybe we need to control it more to be absolutely sure if there is an outbreak, we can pinpoint it exactly. And that's where the inter-county game might come. And it might mean, having a specific ground or a few grounds nominated around the country. But I mean, there are arguments to be made that now that we've more of a map of where the virus has spread, that we know there are certain areas of the country that haven't been as affected. We have limited evidence now as well that children aren't the terrible vectors they were made out to be, the poor things. They were ostracised by society for a few weeks. And if that's the case, if you're in a part of the country that wasn't really affected, thankfully, by COVID-19, if we seem to know now that children aren't the vectors we thought they were, if the person running the cool camp is a 22-year-old footballer who's making a bit of pocket money and getting himself out, like you said, sun on the back, is there a big issue with letting a group of children, a small group that could be managed, out to a cool camp? I don't know. You could argue that children understand social distancing.
Once we're absolutely concrete that the information around the disease won't change again in a month. And how confident can we be? Because the information around this has changed regularly. Like, we're still in the infancy of it.
And it will keep changing.
Well, that's the point.
It will keep changing.
We could be sitting here and talking in a month saying, well, new information has shown X, Y, and Z, and so therefore
that's where you quote the WHO and Mike Ryan, where he basically said that you don't have to be right all the time, you have to be quick. And that's the whole point. We need to get the contact tracing up to the level that we need to have it. Like Cillian de Goscoon was on the radio yesterday, and he was saying, hopefully we need people to get results, be tested and get the results back within 3 days. That allows time for you to not be as infective, because apparently now they seem to know that if I catch it today on Saturday, I won't start shedding it maybe till Tuesday.
Right.
Or today's not even Saturday, it's Sunday. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So once you get your testing in that 3-day window, that means very, very quickly, if there's an outbreak or if somebody has it, it can be shut down. So I think it's less to do with does he have it, does he not? What do we know? Do we know is it attacking alveoli? Is it attacking blood vessels? Is it attacking this Kawasaki disease? What we need to know is where it is and shutting it down ASAP. And that's going to be life, and we have to accept it. But that doesn't mean we all stay indoors, I feel.
Okay. One other GAA piece just to mention for now. Got to take a short ad break in a moment. But David Brady has been doing great things. This is on page 21 of the Sunday Times. This is the first nice story we've talked about in an hour. Feel good. A smile to your face, Kieran Cunningham, I can see it. So, David Brady is just a brilliant fella, and anyone who meets him comes away energised by his company and feeling good about life. He's just one of the greats. So the headline, Mick Foley's been talking to him, I'm listening to people talk about good deeds, it's inspiring. Essentially, as David Brady tells Mick Foley, and he's done a few of these interviews, in amidst the crisis, he said, I was wrecking my head. What can I do? How can I volunteer? How can I give my time? I work in the pharmaceutical sector around oncology. I have friends on the front line. I was feeling a bit useless. And he said, once he had a phone call with Tom in Wicklow, I said, that's it. That's how I can do my bit. So he threw up the hashtag #GoodToTalkGAA. And effectively, Tom was somebody he was put in touch with who was cocooning and feeling the silence and the loneliness, and David gave him a ring. He was asked by someone to give him a ring for a chat, and he rang him for a chat, and they talked football and cattle and everything in between, and they both put down the phone, says Mick Foley, feeling good, better than good. And so David Brady said, that's it, that's what I can do. So he reckons, he says to Mick, that he has made half a dozen calls every day since Easter Sunday. Some days it's climbed to 8. By this evening, that will amount to the guts of 250 conversations, none of them less than 15 minutes. Many of them amble easily along for 3/4 of an hour. And David Brady makes the point that he is getting every bit as much out of this as the people he's calling.
Yeah, like you obviously know David very well, Joe. And he said it's good. Like there's a Raymond Carver short story called "A Small Good Thing," and that line is often used, and I see in sports articles. And this is a good thing, but it's far from small. Like it's a really big deal what he's done, and the movement in a way that he's kind of sparked, because a lot of people have, the Monaghan players, footballers have got involved. Some GAA people in Wicklow, Johnny Doyle, Kildare, Owen Liston said a lot himself, and a few of the legendary Kerry players he played with. They've started doing it. He talked to one guy who was a Clare man living in Galway who loved Henry Shefflin, and Henry rang him up, rang this guy up. So, and Michael D. Higgins, the president, has got in touch with David Brady and thanked him for this. And if you factor in the time, you don't have short conversations with David Brady, as he points out there. Like the minimum, 15 minutes is like, how are you to David? So he's devoting, to me, it looks like 3 or 4 hours a day to this. So, and it's unpaid and it's voluntary, and it's really helping people, and fair play to him.
That about sums it up more, Treasa.
Absolutely. Though I really enjoyed the little anecdote when he said he rang Paddy Prendergast, one of the last surviving member of Mayo's cherished All-Ireland winning team from 1951, 94 years old now, and living in Tralee. I don't know why, but I really enjoyed that the last surviving member of that Mayo team lived in Kerry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Mick Foley writes, they finished up with Prendergast wishing him well. Aren't you awful good to call me, said Prendergast. And Brady says, and I'm going, I'd have given my left arm to make that phone call. So it's a great thing. Lots of GAA people involved. That is on page 21 of the Sunday Times. I do want to talk about Paul Kimmage's piece today. We will do that in just one moment after this break.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
This week on the Home Show podcast, the mortgage moratorium has been extended for another 3 months, but what does this actually mean for individuals and how will it affect them? Mortgage expert Martina Hennessy is here with all the details. Knockmore House in Enniskerry has become the unofficial star of the TV hit series Normal People. It's the childhood home of Shane Ross, and he joins me to discuss his childhood experience there. And Roisin Murphy is here with all the details on the best fire pit for your outdoor space this summer.
The Home Show with Sinead Ryan on News Talk.
Listen to the podcast now at newstalk.com and on the News Talk app.
Afternoons are easy with InsureMyVan.ie, Ireland's low-cost van insurance specialist. Get your business back on the road with Insure My Van's best price guarantee. For super savings, visit InsureMyVan.ie. City Financial Marketing Group Limited, trading as InsureMyVan.ie, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
This Irish success story is brought to you by Guaranteed Irish.
Who would have thought from humble beginnings in a small-town butcher shop in the 1880s that Clonakilty black pudding would be exported around the world today? Supporting 50 jobs in the seaside town of West Cork, this family business and its famous recipe has become a local treasure, putting Clonakilty on the global food map. Guaranteed Irish helps you support companies that are altogether better choices for our communities. So look out for it. GuaranteedIrish.ie. Altogether better.
MattressesDelivered.ie for quality mattresses. But did you know that we're now selling dining tables and chairs, bar stools and gaming chairs with same fast free delivery anywhere in Ireland?
Shopping. It's a bit different these days. Here are some handy hints from Dunnes Stores to help customers shop quicker and safer. Make a list before you go shopping so you can move quicker through the store and avoid browsing. If you are shopping for others, please ask us for help. To avoid queues, shop throughout the day and into the evening. We restock our shelves often, so no need to only shop early. Last but not least, always keep 2 metres between yourself and other shoppers. Dunnes Stores, always here for our customers.
The COVID-19 pandemic has been hard for everyone and tragic for many. We have suffered loss of loved ones and loss of contact with family and friends. By working together, lives have been saved. Thank you. Because of your patience, resilience and solidarity, we are now ready to take the first steps on the careful phased reopening of our country. Here are the 5 main things you should know for Phase 1. 1. You are still advised to stay at home, with some limited exceptions, such as for essential shopping, medical appointments, or when caring for others. 2. Construction work can return where it is safe to do so, and there is limited reopening of shops and outdoor amenities. 3. Some outdoor sports and social activity in groups of no more than 4 can resume, but only within your 5-kilometre zone. 4. There is now guidance about wearing face coverings in some settings, such as in shops or in crowded public transport. 5. Working from home where possible is to continue. The details of this first phase of the reopening of our country are now available on gov.ie/phase 1. As we open up society, following the guidance on washing your hands, social distancing and respiratory hygiene will be more important than ever. Please stay the course. We're in this together. Supported by the Government of Ireland.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Welcome back. We're going through the Sunday Papers with Maire, Cheallaigh and Kieran Cunningham. Page 2 and 3 of the Sunday Independent, Paul Kimmage is reflecting on the headline, The 30-Year War. 18th of May, so tomorrow, 30 years ago, he was on the Late Late Show as a 28-year-old. He had just written Rough Ride, and he was being interviewed by Gabe Byrne, and he was being asked questions, putting him in a tough position about the book, and he reflects on the 30 years since and where we are now, and it's been an interesting ride, to say the least, no pun intended. Anything jump out more, Cheallaigh, or any area you want to jump in this piece? I think it's worth just reading because it's hard to get the full breadth of it across, but there are some amazing anecdotes in there.
Yeah, I find Paul Kimmage's work is always fascinating. There's some articles that I find hard to read in that they're nearly at a level where I need to sit down and really concentrate and read them, you know, and other articles are just much easier to read. You can have them with your cappuccino of a Sunday and sit back and watch the world go by. This one falls into the latter category to me, and this is a story we all know inside out at this point, obviously, but it's still really well written. And like you said, we couldn't just pick one excerpt to explain to people what it's about. It's one of those you have to get and read it. But I did really enjoy the opening kind of preamble in the first few paragraphs where he's explaining that he's in on the Late Late Show, the real Late Late Show with the master Gabe Byrne. And it really, really showed how Gabe Byrne was a master interviewer who just allowed people to just talk themselves into a place where they've made life very difficult for the guest and made it such watching. Like he explains here how he didn't become the best Irish broadcaster in history by tickling bellies. The chair was hardly warm when he stopped tickling mine. And he speaks, but he spat in the soup, a vulgar French impression, meaning you've spilled the beans, and it goes on. And he said, you see, I can only take 1 or 2 implications from the book, Paul, and either you're suggesting that Stephen and Sean are taking drugs like the rest of them, or else, if they're not, they're even more superhuman than we even give them credit for. I nodded and flicked my lips and my tongue. Yeah. Which one? He pressed. The audience laughed. I looked at him and feigned a smile. I knew you'd ask me that. He winked and looked straight back. I knew you knew I'd ask you that, and now I'm effed. And I thought that was just brilliant. You can just visualise Paul Kimmage. And not many people make Paul Kimmage squirm, but Gabe Byrne managed it just by letting him talk. And I thought that was just brilliant because a lot of it, it's really entertaining. It's a really good read. There's nothing new in it. There's no harm in that. I think it's good, especially for those of us who are a bit younger as well. It helps kind of reabsorb everything in that what happened at that time. I'm too young to remember that happening at the time. Obviously I know the backstory, but I didn't live it, if that makes sense.
The reaction, the fallout from Rough Ride is well known, Kieran. He was not welcomed back into the sport with open arms. Good friends were very angry at them. Fellow cyclists were very angry at him. Stephen Roach was very angry at him, threatened to sue on the back of the Late Late Show interview. And it was a long time, I suppose. Paul mentions the Festina affair being a huge moment when people finally said, oh, okay, sorry, I didn't believe you when the book came out, but now it's fairly clear there's a problem. And that really is what jumps out at me in this. Like, the most interesting line in the piece, you'd love to tease out with him sometime, where he talks about the hypocrisy being astonishing as in what people were saying about him. For instance, in one of the pieces in the fallout from the book, it was talked about as a sad tale of his, Kimmage's, that is, disillusionment and his inability to cope with his failure to make it on the professional scene after a good career as an amateur. Or Kimmage knows he has lost whatever respect the peloton may have had for him by spitting in their soup, though really he has only dribbled in their bowl. The laws of libel have ruthlessly prevented him from picking out most of his fellow victims by name. It goes on anyway. Just he's not embraced when he comes forward, but he talks about the hypocrisy being astonishing. And he talks about various issues with doping in the past being ignored, and he says the sense that was given was, no, this was all on Kimmage's watch. He was embittered, a second-string loser, the man who had invented doping. He writes, I was so effing angry. And he just finishes that paragraph by saying, and it changed me. And doesn't develop that point, you know. And I always think the second captain's intro where he talks about, you know, look at the joy in his face, just, you know, what the F happened to him? And there's kind of a little bit of a laughter. And he said, no, really, what happened? And those 4 words, and it changed me, jump out.
Well, from reading Paul in the last couple of years, and the odd time I've talked to him, I think Paul has been very reflective in the last while. And, you know, that might be, you know, his father, Christy, passed away a couple of years ago. His brother, Rayfield, died very, very suddenly last year. It was awful tragedy. And those kind of events really impact on you. And, you take stock and you think back about a lot of stuff. And especially then significant anniversaries. And Rough Ride was did make such an impact and had such a huge effect on Paul Kimmage's life and a lot of his friendships and relationships with other people within the sport. But one thing it's very important to understand with Paul is he absolutely loves cycling. He is obsessive about cycling. And he comes from a family that's obsessive and loves cycling. Like, Paul still cycles all the time, and that's not as a racer, but because he just gets sheer joy out of it. And also his relationship with Stephen Roach. Like he mentions there, I'd known and loved Stephen since boyhood. Those are strong words, but he worshipped Stephen Roach. Like, they're roughly the same age. They came up through the ranks, around the same time. So, you know, he was the one he looked up to. He was his idol. I know there's a line at the end where the way it finishes up, he says, you know, I sent him a text. He mentions a dream he had about Stephen. He says, I was drowning in this huge stinking cesspit, and who showed up? One of my old buddies who hated me. I looked at Roach and told him to get stuffed, but he was reaching down, offering his hand, trying to pull me out. I sent him a text a while later. I had a dream about you recently. This is a quote. I gave you a hug. He sent a reply. Let's try to meet for a coffee. End quote. The final 2 words are, we're trying. I'd love them to meet up. And I'd love either Paul to write about it or being a fly in the wall for that conversation, because there's so much history there. And no, those are 2 men that absolutely adore Irish cycling and were key to an extraordinary time. Like, it's hard to believe, Joe, you'd have been too young then. I'm not sure what age you are, but you wouldn't believe how big cycling was in Irish sport.
Yeah, no, I don't. I was too young.
Yeah, like a huge amount of Irish journalists used to cover the Tour, which now nobody would bother. Like, I was talking to Paul during the week about something else, and he was telling me he was actually planning to cover the Tour this year because of the 30th anniversary of Rough Ride. He hasn't been in 7 years, but obviously it's not going to happen now. But there was a time when every newspaper would go, you know, the RT would send a couple, you know, it was a huge deal. And it was down to Kelly Roach predominantly, but there were others as well, like Paul and like Martin Early. Like, it was a big deal. And he spat in the soup, which was a brave thing to do. And we need more people to be spitting in the soup in other sports.
Mm. The other thing that jumps out when you read this whole piece, and it's so absorbing, you get into it, whatever way he manages to hook you in and keep you there is pretty special. How the hell he got a D in Leaving Cert English needs to be examined. I mean, that surely is...
And that would be very worrying for people getting predictive marks.
The surest point yet that the education system is completely broken. It's really well worth the read. It is. And to a lot of people who follow this for years, it won't be breaking news in many respects, although there's tons of little anecdotes in it that are new and fresh and you don't know. But regardless, it's just so well put together. It really is well worth the read. That's on page 2 and 3 of the Sunday Independent. A few last pieces before we begin to wrap things up. So what have we've done? Oh, Wayne Rooney. Wayne Rooney, believe it or not, is featuring quite a bit on this paper review of late. He's been writing for the Sunday Times for maybe about a month and a half, 2 months, and he hasn't written a column that hasn't had something in it yet. He's making a real effort with it, Kieran. Like, he's not doing this for money. So he's actually trying to be good.
No, to be honest, it doesn't surprise me, because I read an interview that David Winner did with him a few years ago for ESPN. About 10 years ago now, David Winner went on to write Stillness and Speed, a very good book about Dennis Bergkamp. He asked very interesting questions, but Rooney was fascinating. Like, there was passages in that interview years ago where he talked about when a ball comes across, how he processes different decisions, goes through all the options in his head in basically a split second. And it was clear. I remember I sent it to Michael Murphy because I thought Michael would be interested in it. He's very interested in learning from other people, because it was one of the most insightful things I'd ever heard from a footballer. And this piece here is basically about somebody like Yi-Sung Park, who a lot of people have basically forgotten about, how key he was to Manchester United team, and that the role that certain players play that some people overlook. And it reminded me of Didi Hamann. Like, I remember it was at the 2005 Champions League final, and AC Milan were obviously 3-0 up at half-time, and Kaka was running riot. He was running the show. And Hamann came on, and Hamann hardly touched the ball, but neither did Kaka for the rest of the game, and Liverpool ended up winning on penalties. That there's certain players who just know where to be, what space to block out, to have that positional sense, and they're very disciplined. Like, he talked about Thomas Graves when he was at Everton, didn't have that discipline. Like, he just burst out and it would open up space and somebody would get in. But Park would be given certain roles, and it would be... he mentioned a certain game. Can you get that?
Yeah, the Pirlo game. It's famous, where he just did a number on Pirlo.
Of course, yeah. And Pirlo, like, basically, the amount of passes Pirlo made went from whatever it was, 120 to around 40, and he ended up making square and backward passes because Park was so disciplined and took on board the instructions from Alex Ferguson to the letter. And it's something, because a lot of old games are being shown now, obviously over the last 9 weeks, Joe, and what really strikes me is the tactical discipline of teams now compared to the old games you look at.
Yeah. Oh, it's a free-for-all in games even 10 years ago.
Like, you had players in the old games. I find it, like, I watched Ireland-Holland from Italia 90. It wasn't actually a bad game. It was except for the last 20 minutes. Like, Ireland played a lot better than I'd remembered. But you had players shooting from 40 yards, like Steve Staunton, Ronald Koeman a couple of times. And like those low percentage things don't really happen anymore. Like, it's really desperation stuff. Teams are far more, they think their way through games far more, and they're far more disciplined. And I think a lot of Wayne Rooney explains a lot of this in this column. It's a brilliant column. Yeah. I'd advise any coach or any young player who wants to learn more about the game to read it.
Yeah, agreed. On the Pirlo point, just to finish that off, as you said, he was averaging 110 passes per game, and crucially 60 to 70 of them were forward passes. And so Ferguson detailed Park to follow him everywhere. One of the interesting points, though, and you can imagine, you can see Pirlo doing this, and this is one of the reasons why he was so hard to stop. Fergie said to Park, he can't be allowed that pass. You can't be 1 yard or 1 second late. And the pass he's talking about there is where Pirlo goes to the fullback. You can picture him in your mind doing it. Fullback gives him the ball onto his right foot effectively, and he whips it around the corner over the centre back's head for Shevchenko or Kaka to run through. We've seen players do that. Pirlo was exceptional at it, and so that meant you couldn't be a yard or two off him because he can just whip the pass over the top and cause havoc. And Pirlo was that close to him that he stopped him. He nullified him, and I think by the end Pirlo was utterly fed up. It's this famous match, it's kind of Nobby Styles on Eusebio territory. Maire Treasa, Cheallaigh, I know you're very interested in coaching. I'm sure you got a lot out of this as well. There was some great nuggets in it.
I really loved, I even highlighted the line, it was under the heading, teams win, individuals lose. At Everton, winning a game meant a night out. At United, it was very different. Winning was simply expected. My first trophy was a League Cup in 2006. I was absolutely delighted, and as we flew home from Cardiff, I was thinking, right, we're going out to celebrate. Then we got off the plane and everyone went home. I ended up back in the house, the Chinese watching the TV. Under Alex Ferguson, winning was just what you did. And I thought that was really interesting. And I think actually coaching and sports psychology has moved on a bit even from then. Whereas even now, when winning is expected, I think it's also encouraged at the very least that you celebrate your wins, but find a safe and healthy way to celebrate them. So I'm not sure maybe getting a Chinese at home would be the way that I would encourage a team to celebrate a win, because at the end of the day, silverware is silverware. But I just thought it was very interesting how he actually preaches a lot of what you'll find in sports psychology books here about communication, how everyone needs to feel safe in communicating. That means me, the young one coming into the team who doesn't know any better, or your perception is to be shouting at the veteran in the team. You need to be able to have that kind of safe, constructive space that everybody feels safe to do that. And building teams, the way he talks about how the manager needs to have a vision of what pieces he needs and how they will fit together. And isn't that a big problem still this day to lots of different sports, not just football? Manager may have a vision, but he mightn't have the pieces, or he might have the pieces, but not the vision to finish the jigsaw. And it's the manager that has the jigsaw put together is usually the person who ends up on top. And a lot of the time, the jigsaw is not a sum of all wonderful parts.
Yeah. Just one last point which jumped out at me, because I guarantee you if Graham Souness is sitting down to read his papers this morning, he's nodding in agreement at this. Souness has been saying this for about 2 or 3 years. So Rooney is talking about the various different challenges you come up against. He says the fullback who comes out with the ball is obviously very tricky because it adds an extra number into midfield. But he says another nightmare is Frank Lampard, or that type of player, the midfielder who runs past you. So basically he's saying, with Frank, when the ball went wide, you just knew Frank Lampard was off. He was sprinting into the box, and he was one of those who Ferguson would say, this player is not a one-man job, you have to pass them on. And interestingly, and this jumped out at me a little bit, because I was such a fan of Stephen Ireland when he started. Ferguson, Rooney says, would say this about some players you wouldn't imagine, writes Rooney. Stephen Ireland was one. Purely because they were willing to run beyond your midfield. And with those players, there's going to be a crossover movement from when your centre midfielder is dealing with it to when your centre back is. One lapse of team concentration and the best punish you, like Lampard. So Stephen Ireland gets really a big mention.
And also when he talked about what they hate, what teams hate as well, are centre halves who come out with the ball. And you do see that, with Liverpool in particular, how often Gomez and Van Dijk will come out. There's clearly a tactic, because it really does put a midfield under pressure. There's a lot of stuff in it. Like Gerrard would be another one, Steven Gerrard, 100%. I think, who would break the line. That way, he didn't really have the tactical discipline for central midfield, but that way of just doing those bursts, and you go, like, whose man is he now? Who takes him?
He was such an athlete.
That's why he
couldn't be tracked. And that, to round off the point, is the point that Rooney makes about Pogba, and the point that Souness has made about Pogba. Souness has said this exact thing about him numerous times. So Rooney says, I'd love to see Pogba playing deeper and attack the box the moment the ball goes wide. He would score more goals, and with his feet, athleticism, he would be an absolute nightmare. I would use him in that role. It's one where, if he developed in it, he could be incredible. And Souness has said that of Pogba. Souness has said, playing against him in midfield, the way he plays at the moment, everything in front of me, never running beyond me, no problem. But he said, can you imagine Paul Pogba running beyond you for 90 minutes and having to chase back into the box after him? And like, his ability to finish is clear, and he'd be a nightmare. I don't know why he hasn't quite done it, but
because Pogba's always reminded me of Gerrard, that he could be that that kind of player who's capable of devastating interventions, because that was Gerrard's strength. You could point out deficiencies in this game, but he could win a huge game for you, like with doing something that not many other players could manage.
Maire, Treasa, I have a few last pieces jotted down. We won't have time for them all, but I do have Tommy Conlon written down.
Yes.
We had Ross Munley. I know one of you sent through Alan Kearns' interview as well in the Mail. So whatever takes your fancy.
I'm going to start with Tommy Conlon, because he's here right in front of me, smiling out at me from the paper. And he just illustrates the contrast between the Bundesliga starting off yesterday and then the Premier League making it up as they go along. And I think this ties in nicely with the discussion we had earlier about the GAA saying, are they being too conservative? Are we taking chances? We allow things to happen? I think we have all the evidence to show here in Ireland that sporting organisations are making decisions based on the evidence presented to them. Tommy has laid it out here that the Premier League seem to be making it up as they go along. There is still no such terra firma for the Premier League, nor would it appear for British society. In this crisis, a floundering government has made for a frightened populace. The dramatically escalating toll of sickness and death in Britain seems to have destabilised confidence and trust nationwide. This has percolated down to a football industry that seems similarly disorientated. As with the government, it appears to be chopping and changing from week to week, giving the unavoidable impression that it's making it up as it goes along. I can't see any evidence beyond that the Premier League are making it up as they go along. And I think this is why we're seeing footballers in the Premier League coming out saying, I'm not sure it's safe. Why would you think it's safe? If you lived in England right now, after everything we've seen happening there, it makes me very, very, very glad for one of the lots of different reasons that I am Irish and living in Ireland right now. And we mightn't always agree with the decisions being made. We spent a long time discussing things going on right now. But at the moment, we do know, from what we can see anyway, that most decisions are being made in line with public health advice. You can't see that happening in England. And I think this is where the Premier League is going to get unstuck.
Yeah, certainly the players are on all the back pages. So there's another Zoom call tomorrow. That's all they're doing at the moment. Conference call after conference call.
Kicking it down the road.
You mentioned Ross Munley as well. I didn't get it. There was a lot of extracurricular business going on this morning. I didn't quite get to this. So this is Ross Munley talking about Miko, is it?
Yeah, he's speaking about, in his 18th year as a Laois footballer, and Ross Munley's talking how he's still playing. It's an interview with Philip Lanigan, and it's just going through lots of different memories that Ross has. And one that struck out to me big time was in the league final against Tyrone. Ross had his first light bulb moment as a senior footballer. I came on at half-time as a sub. I remember getting a ball. I was back in defence. I distinctly remember fisting it over Peter Canavan's head and running past him to follow up and thinking as I ran past him, Jesus, that's Peter Canavan. I would have been in my back garden imagining myself as Peter Canavan once upon a time. It's like your dream meets reality in the click of your fingers. And really, Ross's career, he's 18 seasons, longest serving outfield player in the game following the winter retirement of Mayo's Andy Moran and Monaghan's Vinnie Corey. At the end of the year, he'll turn 38, and he's turning upside down the notion. He was born just before Christmas in December. We've heard so many discussions over the recent years about how if you're born in December, you probably won't make it in football. Obviously, Ross Munley never got that memo.
Geez, he's still a young 38, isn't he?
He is very young, but he looks after himself, Joe. He won't take any of my treats in Croke Park.
Okay. Kieran, well, that's the true litmus test. Tommy Welch fails every time. Any last piece you want to mention, Kieran?
Yeah, there's one I actually didn't put in the list earlier. I only came across it after I was talking to you. But I think there's a lot of nostalgia stuff about the moment. And to be honest, I've got nostalgia overload. But
you should stay tuned for our interview with Packy Bonner between 3 and 4.
Yeah, that's different. Packy, you have to go to Packy Bonner. Get the Donegal pronunciation right. But the Ger Siggins is different. Like Ger is a former sports editor of the Sunday Tribune. He's a cricket specialist. He's a freelance now. And he's very, very interesting in sports history. And he has a piece in The Sun, because a lot of the nostalgia stuff is recycling stories I've known already. And sometimes I don't have the appetite to go into them again. But I'd never heard this story. It's about a team from the Gold Coast in Africa, which is now called Ghana. And they played the League of Ireland selection in 1951 at Dalymount Park, and 17,000 people turned up. But they played in bare feet. Like, it's just an extraordinary story. They'd done this tour of the UK and Ireland, and they were taken to see a Rock Hudson film the night before they played. It's worth reading. It's just something a little bit different, and it's one of those kind of stories that Paul Rouse sometimes brings up that you just never heard before. And Ger is good at unearthing those too.
Okay, very good. Well, listen, we're about out of time, but my thanks to you both. Kieran Cunningham, Chief Sports Writer with the Irish Daily Star, thank you. And Maire Cheallaigh, a GAA reporter and in the midst of your medical studies. How's it going, by the way? I know you're obviously in hospitals and helping with the effort in a big way as well.
I'm now in exam mode, and if any of my lecturers are listening to this is not me. And I have exams now at the end of the month, and hopefully be out the other end in early June, and that'll be halfway through a 4-year degree. Fingers crossed. So 3 big exams coming up, so I'm the head in the books now. But hospital-wise, it's, for the want of a better phrase, it's looking good. There's fewer and fewer patients, and there's less people that need to be looked after in ICU because of COVID-19, and that's because of people actually paying attention and doing what we were asked to do. And I think the next challenge now is making sure we have a second wave that's balanced as well.
Okay, well, we wish you well. Thanks so much for joining us, Kieran. Thanks again.
No problem. Thanks, Chip.
That's the paper review. Kieran Cunningham, Maire Cheallaigh. Between 3 and 4, as mentioned, Packy Bonner is going to join us for a feature interview. He's live. He'll be coming on his Skype line, 53106, if you want to put any questions to Packy, or he'll get us at Off the Ball as well. Between 4 and 5, we're going to talk to Seamus Power about life on the PGA Tour. And then between 5 and 6, Neil Treacy is in conversation with Paul Warwick on his Connacht and Munster days. So that is the plan. Back with news headlines in a few moments.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
In these difficult times, many businesses are still very much open